Naresh, I'd love to hear from you and learn further from you.
Let me start by thanking the Laszlo Institute, and in particular, Alexander, for having me with you. This has been a wonderful symposium so far. I've really been enjoying this. Building on what Charles was talking about, I think the way I think about the design challenge is by looking at my backyard, and I think about the deck and the garden. So if you want, the design process, I think, is more like cultivating the garden rather than building the deck, which is an engineering project that has a design up front. And that's, for me, is the way one might think about it. It does have a little bit of forethought and planning, but a lot of it is evolutionary in nature. And you can't be sure of what will emerge at the end, although with love and care, you do get something desirable. In terms of the law, I think Flavia was touching on some very important points to do with what the law can and should be. We also need to think of what the law is as it is now. And as it is now, I would argue, to quote Lord Denning from the UK, who once said, justice must be above the law. Somehow the law does not always deliver justice to the world's people. I was the director of a commission on legal empowerment of the poor in the UN, and I wrote a book as well in 2014 on legal rights of the poor, and I teach a course on legal empowerment of the poor. What we found was that 4 billion people, now it's about 4.5 billion people on the planet, cannot use the law to improve their lives. They only encounter the law in a punitive way when they are punished for something. So something serious needs to be done about how we make law, how we implement law, and for whom we make law. In fact, who makes the law also needs to be re-examined. So these two are really nice for me to build on, because I've been thinking myself about quite a few of these issues. I work now in academia. I took the bold step recently after spending about 3 decades working in policy making with politicians, prime ministers and presidents and ministers of government. And I have been trying to use the principles of unity, of holarchy, and of evolutionary coherence for the last 25 years. The reason I moved, one might say, is because I sort of gave up on trying to make this work in what I used to call, and people call, the real world. And I figured out maybe I don't understand this thing well enough. I started my work in complex adaptive systems thinking and worked with some of the leaders in the field across the world. So these principles I hold very close to my heart. Panarchy and synarchy and holarchy and holons rather than hierarchies, the Janus two-faced, in every holon, it sees both top and bottom. It's not only from top to bottom. And working with these principles over all these years in the federal government of Canada and in the United Nations system, it's very difficult. The existing institutional arrangements and the paradigm that we are in, it's a stronghold. And we need to find these ways of how we will get out of it. And as Charles was saying, it'll be sowing seeds. And I thought the best way to understand something is perhaps to teach it. And so now I teach. We have set up a center that has 3 main streams of work. One is, and they're all related to public policy. And as you know, law and politics are at the heart of public policy. So these 3 streams are complex adaptive systems, or if you like, complexity economics. So how do we remake an economics that does not have to make the simplistic assumptions of mainstream economics, which are about equilibria? And we know that what we are dealing with is non-equilibria, far from equilibrium systems, or at minimum non-equilibrium systems. We are dealing with situations of imperfect information systems. We are dealing with human beings who have bounded rationality, not perfect rationality, and so on. We are not just self-interested robots, in other words. We are something much more than that. And mainstream economics uses all these simplifications. So we are now asking the questions, how do we get out of this and see a real world economics in a very different way, building on the principles we are talking about. The next stream of work is quantum social science. So how do we use the principles of entanglement and superposition and non-locality in the public policy process? What would public policy look like if made in this different way? And the third stream is the stream of applied spirituality. And when we brought this up at the beginning, some colleagues were a bit doubtful. They are all enamored now because we need to ask ourselves the question, who are we? What am I? You know, so what we have found, and I teach some, give some lectures on this, the mystical core of all the world's major religions is the same, almost the same. They all teach a shared consciousness, a oneness of humanity. And so that blends so neatly with consciousness studies, the new cognitive sciences. They are all reinforcing each other. And so this is the kind of contribution we are hoping to make. And I'm hoping to collaborate with the Laszlo Institute with your work, which I have read up on the SEEDS Constitution and found it really, really fascinating. And bringing it all together. So now we hopefully can bring exactly these principles that we are talking about here into the public process, public policy process, into the way public service is delivered, and hope to join hands with everybody to try to make this a reality.
I love that. That's really groundbreaking work. And yes, completely for the collaboration. This is fascinating. Alexander, I'd like to bring you in so you can share our next question.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Isn't this, I also want to share with everyone who's tuning in and watching and listening and really hopefully engaging in this participatory listening engagement where you are in the dialogue with the speakers as well, listening into what is emerging here. I know that my own level of frustration is I have so much to share as well. You must too as you're listening to this. This brings up a lot of questions and a lot of potential for us to understand how we can really be involved in embodying and enacting these new, not necessarily even new, because these are actually age-old ways of communing, common unity, community. But rather than wax forth on this, I'm going to ask another question here of our lovely panel. And the question now is, if we were to think about the aspect in which all these new constitutions are coming online, people are working on these kind of things. We've seen the SEEDS thing that Anne-Luce has shared. If we go from the principles that we've been discussing just now, Naresh, you were just focusing on as well, and we start to think in terms of the important actions that we need to take, personally, interpersonally, organizationally, what are the important actions that you would call to our attention? You know, because tomorrow again, we're going to be moving into action collectively around this. So just to prepare for that, how would you think about that? And this is the kind of thing, Naresh, that you are looking at with regard to complex adaptive systems. And what's your take on this in terms of important action?
Thanks, Alexander. Let me start with what I have found important for me at the personal level, and then I will share at the institutional level. I have found in my own understanding of the world and how I make meaning, I first had to go through my own contemplative practice, and to understand my own true nature, I had to go through the process of what am I, who am I, to learn and to go beyond what I now see as the layers of my own egoistic structures and conditionalities. So I had to live what I wanted to teach. I had to learn to become that. That helps me, I believe, to be more natural. And then I have less worry about the philosophical, metaphysical challenges of what is important or what is right. It tends to flow more naturally, so to speak. Not to say that you become infallible. We are human and will always be fallible. But then I start to understand my own sharing of the same consciousness like all other humans. That begins to give you the kind of natural connection to all of us. So when I say oneness, I don't have to anymore like preach a desired attribute in human beings. I begin to recognize it everywhere I look. And I think so that at the personal level, I think there is some work to be done. I have more work to do. And I encourage all of us to look at that so that we internalize that which we are philosophizing about a lot and really get to know it deeply as a human being. Then at the institutional level, in terms of action points for tomorrow, listening very carefully to the symposium so far and recalling some of the ideas from yesterday, I think we have to be careful to distinguish between ameliorating the negative consequences of the existing paradigm and not confuse it with the new shoots of the emerging paradigm. So there is a lot of work ongoing, in which we are ameliorating the negative impacts of the existing paradigm in which we all operate. But it's going way beyond that and nurturing shoots of this new paradigm that we need to be talking about. If we take climate change to build a little bit on what Charles was mentioning, when I deal with climate change and we teach it as a public policy challenge, one might say that the cause of climate change is greenhouse gases emission, and that greenhouse gas emission is the result of fossil fuel driven capitalism, which is the way our civilization is currently organized. But when we examine the fossil fuel based capitalism we have, we find driving that is this desire for endless economic growth, and the kind of growth that is based on consumption, a growth which means that we must consume more and more. We are failing to decouple quality of life from consumption. So we find way underneath something else, and that is this lack of security, fear, this inadequacy that we feel as individuals, that we are always seeking something more, something material more to make ourselves complete. So now we are getting to root causes, and it's there that one's own spiritual nature becomes clear. And if you don't have that understanding and our new paradigm is not able to integrate that, I fear that all we will be doing is ameliorating the negative impacts. We will be acting at a superficial cause level. You see what I mean? Because we need to go from the symptoms of global warming and sea level rise to the greenhouse gases, yes, and reduce that, and go below that to fossil fuel-based capitalism. We need to go even below that to understanding the nature of humans as we are and what is driving this whole thing. And if we don't get there, then we are not going to make progress. And I think that kind of action we need to understand clearly as we go forward. And finally, let me make the point about the trajectory of change. When paradigms are emerging, it looks like they have a long tail, an incubation period, where you don't see much. It is where the new ideas are starting to bubble up, networks are being formed, and gradually we begin to get bigger and bigger networks until hopefully we meet the tipping point. While we are struggling to move up the hill, we have the keepers of the old system, those who benefit from the old system. And we have to take action as bridge builders to move these keepers of the old system onto this new trajectory of change. Otherwise, we will delay reaching that tipping point for dramatic shift. It doesn't mean that we are not making progress all along the way, but that tipping point, arriving there, can be quite elusive unless we take a multidimensional approach. So in terms of actions, those are some of the ideas that I will put on the table. And I will finally just want to say on education, because I'm now active in the field. I wondered, with my students at the master's level, I sometimes worry that we have already lost it. They have already been educated up to a bachelor's level and are already within, their minds are so set in the existing paradigm. It's as though we have lost them already. It's so difficult for them to begin to change. So then I wonder, is it secondary school, or is it primary school, or is it kindergarten? Where do we begin to sow the seeds of change? I conclude that we can start at any point within the system and begin to make this change. The point at which I am making the contribution, which is mainly in graduate school, is that these people will then come out, they will become policymakers, they will become teachers, and they will begin to sow seeds within their own spheres of influence and hopefully help to support the paradigm of change.
Naresh, thank you so much. I think what we're all talking about here in terms of actions is really about how to human well, something that I got from Alan Watts, exploring what does it mean to human well as an expression of the universe. How Alan Watts will talk about how in the springtime the trees don't put out leaves, they don't produce that doesn't make, that is not what they do in the spring, or the flowers putting out their buds and their flowers. The flowers bloom and the trees leaf, and doing that is spring. That is spring. How do we human on this planet? And what does that mean to bring about that aspect of our interconnected, interdependent, co-arising in the context of thrivability with all things? I think what I'm hearing from you as well is really this kind of embodied and enacted systemic consciousness, or a way of developing a relational frames of being. That is something, as you say, we can learn and bring into different levels of engagement at any point in our life. So thank you so much. So, for example, we have a question here. Can the management of our worldwide technosphere be a unifying objective in the new paradigm? Please, anyone who would like to address that.
Alexander, if I might address that. One of the issues we find is in our attempts to teach like technology policy, let's say, in the social sciences where policy is largely designed, what constitutes valid knowledge is even tested. We are talking a lot about, the spiritual dimension and how to bring this into this paradigm of politics. And the first question I really had to search deep for was, is internal knowing even valid knowledge in the sense of publishable in an economic or a social science journal, for example? I mean, in my little world of academia, it becomes a really hard question. Fortunately, we have enough evidence now to be able to show that internal knowledge is valid social science knowledge, which is publishable. That begins to allow us to make the link between, for example, spirituality and policy, and including technology policy. And that is, I think, which can guide, or hopefully can guide us in the way we deal with the technosphere. I just wanted to make that quick little link, but leave it to other colleagues to add to that.